On this episode, we'll discuss using data to discover your church's target audience. Well, hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast, the show that is dedicated to inspiring leaders and empowering healthy churches. How do we do that? It is all through having conversations and interviews and stories as we explore what's happening in ministry today and how pastors and leaders can navigate what lies ahead. I'm your host, Kendall Connor. So excited to be joining you today, and we have a great one planned. I'm really excited about this because we have a special guest joining me today, and it is the one and only Tyler Harden. Now, listen, let me give you a little bit of a background on Tyler if you haven't had a chance to connect with him yet, because you're going to love him. He's a great guy that I'm excited to jump into this conversation with. So Tyler is a church growth consultant, and he is the co-founder of Firm Foundations Marketing. It's there that he has helped hundreds of plateaued churches find their focus in order to kind of break through those growth barriers. And so he is able to combine his skills from a marketing marketing background and having that experience, but also has that ministry experience that he brings to it. And he combines those, and he's able to help church leaders to use a research-backed approach so that they can really reach more of the right people with the right methods, if that makes sense. And so today we're going to discuss how churches and ministry leaders can use data to discover, who a church's target audience should be. And if that just sounds like a mystery to you, thinking, Kendall, what are you talking about? You're in the right place. So we're going to jump into this conversation, and I know that we're going to be able to pull a lot of great information out of it. And so without further ado, I want to welcome Tyler into this and jump right in. Hey there, Tyler. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing wonderful. Thanks, Kendall, for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining me on here. We got to connect not too long ago, and I just thought, man, this is valuable information for churches, right? That we'll be able to jump on this topic of using real life data, right? And things as we jump in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be good. I appreciate you taking time to talk with us. And, something, we just read the public bio, and that's always great, right? But kind of the way that we like to start off these conversations is, I want to know something that doesn't make that public bio, right? Like, what's something that wouldn't be on the front of the website, right? Can you tell us anything like that?
Yeah, I think sort of maybe one of the more quirky things or surprising things in some ways. So my entrepreneurial journey started in college. Selling copies of Rick Warren's A Purpose-Driven Life.
So so do you know how many copies of this that you sold?
I don't recall, but I went to Liberty University for college back in the day, and it was a book that we always joked about. It was a $7 free book. They gave it to every student, but it was actually billed to your student account. And most of the students didn't want to keep their copy. So I got all their free books and was flipping them on eBay.
Wow.
That eventually led to a less spiritual sale, but I started selling clothes on eBay and, doing tens of thousands of dollars
for my
eBay
dorm room experience too, which is always really interesting.
Always was a fun thing for me to do.
Well, that's man, I can remember when that book first came out and going through that book, and so spreading a little hope early on, right? Yeah. Oh, that's fine, and have that entrepreneurial spirit from the get go. It sounds like that's awesome.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your story, for our listeners that maybe, they haven't heard or connected with you before. They haven't heard about your Firm Foundations Marketing and how you help churches. Would you tell us a little bit about how you got into that after all the eBay sales, right?
Yeah. After college, I went and I worked for a newspaper for about 12 years. But what really kind of kicked off Firm Foundations Marketing was in 2018, actually 7 years as of yesterday, when this recording's being done, I was laid off. Our department was eliminated. Wow. I had a third child on the way in a couple of months. And wow. I mean, it's the only job I had out of college, or not the only job, the only employer I had out of college, and just had no idea where to turn next. The market that I'm in doesn't have a ton of marketing jobs, and that was what I did.
Right.
And so everything was really scary, really fast, and not knowing where to turn next.
Sure.
And it was really in those days and weeks after that, and just kind of seeking the Lord and what's next, that I felt him calling me to start my own business, and to serve churches specifically, to take the things that I had learned in the corporate world, and all those experiences, and to apply them to the benefit of the gospel. And it's not something I anticipated having happen, but
that's how God works sometimes, right? Like the things we least expect, and he can use pieces from our story that, like we just never anticipated that would be something that would be helpful later, right?
Yeah. And he would put people and conversations in place that would kind of give me the confidence to move forward in that scary endeavor. And, as time had gone on, we initially launched kind of wanting to be a full service agency for churches, because that was the world we came out of. It was what we knew. But after working with several churches, kind of realized that so many of their problems were much deeper than they just needed some pixels move around on a website, or they needed some social media ads. And it's because like so many pastors and churches kind of just neglect the fundamentals, right? The foundational elements that really determine if something sticks. You go to conferences, you hear all these different things, and you just want to go and apply them, and you never contextualize them. And I think what really happened was with COVID, it really clarified this idea that the world changes, right? Like, I think we know that, but we don't do anything different about it. The world changes, people change, but churches have a tendency to change, to not change and to stay the same. So I hear from pastors almost every week that are still lamenting the loss of COVID because, even though it's been 5 years, they don't know what to do to reach people anymore. They were kind of resting on their laurels, so to speak. And so the question really is like, what's next? So as far as Firm Foundations is concerned, you fast forward 7 years and helping hundreds of churches. We've certainly learned a lot of things as far as what those churches and pastors need in order to reach their community more effectively. And so that's why we're here talking today, I guess.
Love that. No, and love hearing your heart and that journey. The story is always an amazing part for me to hear, just how people got to different places and, how passions got started. I mean, it's incredible, again, how God can string together things and make things happen. I love that. Now, let's talk a little bit about, you're working with churches every day, right? You're talking with ministry leaders. I know in our conversation that we have had before, you emphasize the importance of trying to find what a church's ideal audience. Can you tell us a little bit about your heart in that and what makes that tick for a church?
Yeah, so I firmly believe that every church is designed for a purpose and a people. And too often we don't take the time to define who those people are. So when we talk about target audience or ideal audience is the language that we use, it's really the people in your community that your church is best equipped to reach, minister to, and serve. Right? There's a reason why, Bible Belt example, there's a church on every corner. Like we're not all able to reach and equip the same people in that same community. We have different strengths, different DNA, different ways of doing church. And so being able to articulate who it is that you can really serve well, and how that aligns with your strengths and opportunities and those kinds of things is what separates the churches that are struggling and plateaued, and the ones that are growing, because they know who they are, they know who they can help, and they know how to help them.
I'm working in my church, right? Serving in my church each week. I hear that we need to know who our ideal audience is. But Tyler, how in the world do we find that out? How do we figure that out?
Yeah, so I'll start here with what I commonly hear from folks. I hear pastors say, hey, we want to reach young families, or we want to reach the de-churched or the unchurched in our community. And while I 100% love the heart behind that, what is a young family, for example? Like in different parts of the country, like, if you're in like a DC suburb, young families is like adults that are pushing 40 because they wait so long to have kids. Yeah. Right. And then others will say, oh, well, it's like a 25-year-old newlywed. And it's like, and others will have somewhere in between. And so what is that? Right. And then really what's more important is to dig deeper in the research world. It's called psychographics, but it's really like the things that
we're really diving into this.
I know I had to drop a big word.
I love that you know your stuff on this topic.
But it's the things that drive them ultimately to make a decision. So when pastors are struggling with, man, all these people aren't coming to church because their kids are in travel ball, like, Well, why is that the case? What's the underlying motivation that's causing them to rearrange their entire life and schedule? And so when you dig into that, when we go below the surface, we start to identify the things that really draw people to us or push them away from our church, right? So, I like to use what I call the 5 Ps of church target audience to sort of give some framework around what that might look like beyond just defining young families, right? So the first P is people. Like, this is the basic demographics. This is more of the natural definition that somebody might say in a conversation, like, oh, it's a married couple in their 30s, or they have 2 kids, whatever. The next P is place. So many times when I talk to pastors and church leaders, they never take the time to define the geography from where these people are supposed to come from. And it's such an important component. And sometimes they're like, well, is it the people that are at our church already? Is it, where do they, our members live far away? I talk about the church donut a lot, like, especially if you're in a, more metropolitan area, like your members probably moved out to the suburbs at some point as they had families and wanted more peace and quiet. Well, you don't necessarily want to target way out there because your members are invested in driving in, but their neighbors are not. Right. So, like, what's the core ministry area? If you only had X amount of dollars to spend, are you going to spend it, in your neighborhood within 5 miles or something? Or are you going to spend it, 50 miles away?
And I want to, before you move forward, I want to pause right there and just share, a recent experience. Our church just recently went through a move. As a matter of fact, at the time of this recording, we are getting ready to have our grand opening celebration of our first. We've been portable, a church plant. We've been portable for 10 years, over 10 years, moving into our first leased space, right? So our first permanent location that, like, okay, we go in and we flip the lights on, right? Like, we set up, have our own our own facility, right? That's a big move in a church plant, I can tell you that. Yep. And going from setting up every week. But as a part of that process, we took an assessment of where every person who calls our church home is, and we got a little taste of exactly what you're describing, right? Yeah. We couldn't believe it. We could not believe, Tyler, where everybody in our church was, and over this 10-year history, how far, like, many of them were driving in and things like that. It was amazing to us. And I can't imagine how many ministries that are out there have never once paused to look up that information. And a lot of times, right, we have the data, right? We have those church management software, right? Like, we have all of the addresses that are in there, but have never put it up on a map and being able to see it. It can be so surprising. So just to your point, it's an important thing to look into.
That significantly impacts your ability to minister locally. Like, if people don't feel connected to your area because they live somewhere else, that becomes a real missional challenge over time, right? So it's one of those things you want to be ahead of rather than behind on.
Yeah, that's the truth. Yeah.
So we have
people, place, right?
Yes, people, place, passion. So what are they interested in? So that goes back to even like the example of the family that their kids are in travel ball. What are they really interested in? Sometimes churches, pastors like to think spiritual things on these, but it's like, we're trying to get real practical, right? Because ultimately, when we paint this picture, it tends to illuminate the opportunities to serve people, and instead of making excuses or complaining, and we can identify, like, okay, well, this is the season that they're at. We talk a lot about meeting people where they're at, right, in the church space, but we don't always do anything about it.
Yes,
and so this can help sort of spur on creativity in ministering in unusual and new ways when we have a better understanding of what these things are. The next one is pain points. It's technically 2 Ps, but struggles. What are they dealing with? I hear everything from, like, addiction to, financial struggles, relationship struggles, marriage, those kinds of things. But again, once you take the time to actually put pen to paper and list these, the ministry opportunities sort of bubble to the surface, right? Like, we understand what's going on in their lives, and we become more empathetic. Empathy is a superpower. But if we don't take the time to understand people, we'll never get to utilize it. And then the last P is pursuits. What are their aspirations? Like, where are they trying to go in life? What's the big picture goal? Is it financial stability? Like, do they need to go through a financial peace university sort of thing? Are they trying to raise kids in the faith? what are those things that are important to them, big picture goals, and how can the church step in and align with that transformation that they're looking for, in ways big or small, right? But it's really hitting those 5 categories. It's not everything, but man, it'll put you light years ahead of where most churches start, and you can start taking real, meaningful, actionable steps on it.
I want to pause with this, and that's amazing. Hearing those 5 Ps, it brings a lot of insight into who's making up your church, right? Who the kind of people who call your ministry home. I'm just curious, I'm thinking from the lens of a lead pastor, or, a pastor that's serving in his ministry, probably thinks I've got a pretty good gauge for who my people are, but I may want to challenge anyone who's listening to this today. If you haven't actually asked these questions more recently, if you haven't figured that out, you may be surprised by the answers that you would get, because I feel like those things they're ever changing in my own life, right? As the years go by and things go on. I mean, this is stuff that, is always changing in people. And, I'm curious to know, Tyler, is this something that we should be actively asking our own community, the people that make up our congregation, or is this only useful if we're, figuring out things externally?
No, it's 100% both audiences, if you will. It's the inside and outside. And so when we talk about these within the context of target audience, I want you to think too that there's a reason why we dig below the surface, because if the common pushback I hear when a church wants to target young families is, well, were seniors not important, or whatever not important, whatever other age group not important? No. But that's also why there's these other elements. We don't just stop at the basic demographics, because there's these other areas that are going to pull people together. Like those are core to your culture, to your DNA, to your opportunities, whether they're experiencing them themselves in this season or they've been through them in the past. They want to help the next generation through those same problems. It creates alignment. So that's why it's important to know where that overlap is in your congregation as well as in the community at large.
You talk about kind of the pushback that you may get from even talking about, I know the marketing could be a scary word. Like that's something that we don't always love talking about in a church context. And that's understandable. Research, these are things that, you can kind of feel they can bring, some negative feelings along with, but I think it is important to know who you're talking to. It is important to better know who are you going to be most effectively to reach out to. Let me ask this. In your experience, what are the risks for a church that they don't look into this at all, that they don't spend the time kind of figuring out who they are as a church and who they're trying to reach? What are the risks involved in just ignoring this?
Yeah. So more often than not, they're going to waste a lot of tithe money, burn out a lot of people, and really struggle to kind of build any kind of momentum. Right. And they end up, and all that results in ending up in the same spot where they started. Like, for example, Facebook ads, Google ads, those things are fantastic. Yeah. But if they're driving people to a generic website, you're attracting generic people, and generic people don't stick in your church, right? Like they don't fit. They're that square peg, round hole. And so we always, it's just human nature. We're looking for silver bullets and easy solutions. And so we go to the thing that we hear a lot about, and we don't figure out how to calibrate it to our context.
Wow.
And so, again, when you know your audience, you can tailor those things more intentionally so that you're kind of filtering through the folks that aren't going to stick because you're just frankly not equipped to minister to them best. That's why there's other churches in your community. I mean, so often a lot of the people that call on our company are ones that have tried tactic after tactic after tactic, and realize it's not working. And more often than not, it's when we start to unpack the reasons, it's because they don't know who they're trying to reach, and then they've not articulated anything about who they are, or who they help on all the visible, places that a new person might hear from them.
Data is really helpful in decision making. Again, just going back to this recent experience of figuring out if this new location was going to work out for our church family, right? And we were able to pull on data. I mean, data can help you to make better, more informed decisions, and be a good steward of the finances that you have, right? Of the giving that has come in. And I think that's so important. So I know that you have that background working, you mentioned working and with the market research and things like that. What kind of tools and things are useful in figuring out this information?
Yeah. So of course you can come to us and we'll help you with that. But, ultimately your ability to connect determines your success or failure. So there's a lot of ways to figure out your context. You can just be intentional about having coffee with newer people that are participating in your church, new members, or you can survey your leadership in your congregation. There's tools like the U.S. Census or ESRI, ESRI has some free information out there. They're not going to help you identify your ideal audience, but they'll give you something to kind of start out with trying to learn about what's going on in your community. Of course, you can always talk to government leaders, right? Let's not neglect their important role and connection too in our community. But I think what's most important is we don't just collect information, we do something with it, right? I think I've seen that too often, even other consultants or, we come behind somebody else and there's a giant notebook that the pastor kind of put on a bookshelf and never touched. So what's really important is that you take action. We apply the relevant pieces. You can scale it to where you're at, right? The whole point is not to be overwhelmed with all kinds of ideas. It's to really put the blinders on and find your focus so that you can achieve that growth again.
And I imagine, a great place to start is it is looking internally, looking at the people that you have right now. Going back to those 5 Ps, right? And kind of examining that and asking those questions. And I love that you mentioned something as simple as grabbing that coffee because, knowing your people, is so important as a ministry leader, right? Knowing what's going on in their life and, what things they're passionate about and kind of what stage of life they're in that season, right?
Yep.
But I also love the idea that you shared of, okay, turn to external sources, right? Know what's happening in your city. What are the needs of this city? Who are the people that make up our city? And ultimately, if you're right in a community, if you look right around and you're looking at your neighbors, right? You want to reflect that inside of the house, right? You want to be able to be a representation of that community that's right around you. And I mean, that makes a whole lot of sense to me. Really, really good at practical advice on those. So let me ask you this. If you figure out, you get a basic idea of who your target audience is, so to speak, what steps would you recommend for churches that are trying to figure out, okay, how does that change our messaging? How does that change our outreach? What kind of decisions are we able to make based on that?
Yeah. So, and I'll step back a little bit to say, when we do these assessments with churches, we're pulling in something like 70 different touch points to help identify their target audience.
Wow.
So that's
more than the
5
5.
Ps,
I'm not going to lie.
Right.
I was like,
that
okay,
5 Ps is like, hey, I can't
yeah.
afford to pay and I need some sort of structure and somewhere to start. It's an amazing place to start.
Yes.
But when you have data, I'm going to back up again, some more context. All households in America right now can fall into one of 71 different sort of predetermined profiles. We have natural behaviors and household makeups and way we do things and make decisions. And so when we work with a church to identify their ideal audience, we're helping them identify their top 3 out of 71 within their local community. So I talked to a pastor just the other day, for example, and gave him his top audience segment to focus on, and he's like, "Well, and it was the second largest in his community that he had determined based on geography." He's like, "Well, what would I have to do to reach the largest one?" Right? Because that's how market research in church space is typically done. Is what's the biggest group of people, and what do we got to do to pursue them? Well, in this case, the number 1 and number 2 slot were polar opposites.
Wow.
It was they would need a different pastor. They would need a different type of church. Everything would have to be drastically different. And so you would lose your entire congregation to pursue that one. And it's of course that lends itself to, do we plant another campus? Do we have, or do we just kind of focus on what we have? But it's that kind of information is so powerful to avoiding mistakes that a lot of others would just naturally pursue because it's what's in front of them. But when it comes back to, aligning your message and outreach and all that based on your audience, you got to step back and kind of assess everything, right? It has to be your focus. If these are people, this is what they're struggling with. This is where they want to go in life.
Yeah.
Are we communicating that on our website? How is our guest follow-up methods aligned with how they prefer communication, right? Like, are we doing texting, or are we still just sending a postcard once and forgetting about it? Or, all of those things have to be assessed within that general, that framework of your ideal audience if you're serious about reaching them. And again, I'll underscore that every church is going to reach people outside of that ideal audience. Like, it's just going to happen, right? Because there's multiple reasons why people come to church. Maybe their family's there. Maybe they've been there a long time. Of course, there's so many reasons. But when it comes to pursuing that ideal audience, that target audience, growing young and attracting young families or something like that, you're going to focus on a lot of those things that are essentially part of your culture, right? Like, a lot of times we see senior adults involved in vibrant young adult ministries. Well, it's not because senior adults think that they're 20 somethings again. It's they embrace a church that prioritizes the next generation.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's really good. And we had a podcast episode not too long ago that really focused on figuring out who you are as a church too, because that's an important factor, right? Like you don't want to be inauthentic. You want to lean into the things that kind of make your church, your unique church, special, right? Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. We talk about that all the time. And that, in fact, that's why our our intake process for the research component, it involves assessing 70 different parts of you as a church, right? Your goals and your vision and, the way you do church, what's your leadership style, how do you use small groups, like all kinds of things, drive that decision and who's going to align with what you're offering and want to be a part of what you do.
It reminds me last week we had a podcast guest that was on, and one of the encouraging things that he said was he reminded all the ministry leaders that were listening that God has called you, each ministry leader, to somewhere special, right? Put a unique purpose inside of them, and is really sometimes it can feel like, oh, if I could just be like that leader. Or if we could just be like that church, or, okay, if we take everything, that recipe of all the things that they're doing over there and we apply them here, surely it's going to work, right? But I was so encouraged just with that reminder and our last episode that it was like, you've got to be you in your community. You can't have someone else walk in your calling, right? Like you got to lean into the things that make you unique. And I like that this kind of lines up with that.
Yeah. I talk to so many churches, I'll hear them say something like, oh, we're just a small church. Like I met with a church in Massachusetts about a week ago now. And, we're in a church saturated area, which in their case was like 5 churches. It's not in New England church. A saturated church market is very different than in the Bible Belt. But and I was like, well, tell me about those other churches. Like, oh, they're big. They got big budgets, big kids programs, lots of people, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, that's okay. You're the small church and people want a small church. If you had a whole city full of big churches, everybody would go in and out and never be known. And so it's the things that they think are a detriment are actually their strengths, but they're not playing to their strengths because they're not confident in it. And so when you have data that supports like, oh, these people want a small church, or these people want a traditional type of service, or, like any of those things, it's like, and how many thousands of people align with that ideal. It's encouraging for pastors that have frankly been kind of beat down and discouraged, especially since COVID, and watching half of their congregation walk away and not knowing what to do next and feeling so discouraged and disconnected. And so it just makes a huge difference in kind of seeing the reality that's out there.
Yeah, no, I love that. And, it's again, the encouragement of just knowing that you've got to be who you are, right? Like, and then, being able to reach out to your community, find out who they are. And there's a great place where I feel like those two things intersect. Right. Yep. And that's that sweet spot of getting that target audience in your church and building from there. So I love that. And also just that it show the beauty of the church, right? That there are different styles of worship and things like that. Every church can't be the exact same. And I don't know that's the way that it ought to be. But sometimes you feel like, we got to copy that. We got to do this. But no, there's things that make your unique ministry special. And I love that.
Absolutely.
Could you tell us a little bit, like, what advice would you offer to church leaders that are just hesitant, right, about adopting kind of a data-driven approach, right? They think, okay, we want to be people-focused, but the data is about people, right? Can you tell us a little about what kind of advice would you offer on that?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, data is simply feedback, right? Like a lot of things, it's not good or bad, it's neutral, but data is simply feedback. You can obsess over it or you can ignore it, but neither of those are healthy, right? So it's finding that balance in the middle that keeps you informed. And, just again, like so many things in life, you have to be disciplined, but don't neglect the story that data is trying to tell you because you think it's innately evil.
Right. No, that makes sense.
I recently wrote a Lifeway research article on strategy in the church, for example. And, one of the things I said was your church has a strategy. It's either by design or by default. But if we're supposed to live on mission, we have to have a plan.
Yes.
And so if we're not taking the time to understand our people, how can we really expect to fulfill the calling God's put on our hearts and the vision in our hearts when we're kind of self-isolating, right? And so that's where data comes in to help you filter through all the good decisions to find out what are the best decisions that God would have you to take. Especially in ministry, it's like, man, you see all the opportunity, you see all the brokenness, and you want to do everything. But the problem is when you do that, you spend all your money, you burn out all your people, and you get nowhere, and your mission flatlines. And so focusing on the things that you can do really well and leaving the other things for another church that can do those really well is where we will see that growth, either numerically or spiritually. But it will create that momentum that's needed in order for the church to become healthy.
No, that's so good. You've shared a lot of valuable information here. I'm just curious, are there any, can you share any success stories of kind of where a church has applied some of these methods and has been able to kind of overcome that stagnation, right? And reach that growth, because every church wants to grow, right? And whether it's again, numerically, as you said, or spiritually. Can you tell us anything like that?
Yeah, I'll give you two quick examples here. So we worked with a church plant in Virginia a couple years back, and all they came to us for was some help with their website and their messaging. And part of the process for us is we always start with research. We got to know your ideal audience and what they need so that we can communicate in a way that's relevant. And for them, they're like, man, I live in an area that's just a bunch of rich white people. Like, I know who lives here. It's a homogenous area. Like, everybody's the same. But if research is part of your process, sure, fine, we'll go through it. And so this will go back to sort of the demographics and staying surface level that I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. So we went into the data. We assessed this church and who they are and all that. So of the 71 different types of households that you can find all across the country, they had 58 of the 71 within 15 minutes of their church. So what that tells me is his community is far more diverse than what he ever thought, right? Yeah. Like, we might all have the same skin color or drive similar cars, but that does not mean we live the same life.
Yeah.
You could have two cars in the grocery store parking lot, and one's struggling to make the payments and the other bought it outright cash, right? And how that affects day-to-day life is significant. And so for them, getting that clarity on who they need to focus, what they need to, where they should invest their time and their talents and et cetera, really made a significant difference. So that church plant went from meeting in a school to getting a permanent location. Then shortly after getting a permanent location, being able to expand to 2 services, like
amazing.
And their location was not anywhere fantastic. Frankly, it was far away from, out of sight, out of mind. And so they had a lot of things working against them. But when they know who they are and they know who they can reach really well, that comes to the surface and it can resonate with people. And then the other example is a church in Texas. And that pastor was sort of like one of these, like what I talked about earlier. Like, they had tried all the tactics. They have done the Facebook ads, Google ads. They've hired all the people. They did all the things that you hear about. And it just wasn't moving the needle. And he was, really frustrated. And frankly, I can understand it. Like, you keep thinking something's going to work, and you don't know why. And
super frustrating.
It didn't take but a few minutes of spending time with him and looking at his website and some other things and being like, well, I know what the problem is. You don't know who you're here to reach. And he was in a season of preparing to cast new vision. And so we used research and refining his messaging to really help him cast that vision. more effectively and relevantly. And what happened is his staff leaders became more enthusiastic about where they were going. Their volunteers bought into what was going on, and he saw the actual congregation really excited about what was going on because he understood what's motivating them. He's speaking clearly so they understand their role in the big picture. Yes. And what's going to happen next. And I mean, it was a great sort of transformation that we saw in his case, to go from just that plateaued to like that excitement, and the congregations bought in, not just those leaders. So, I could go on and on with examples, but those are a couple that kind of stand out to me.
This has been really helpful, and I love hearing the stories of, just how it seems simple, right? But what a difference it can make when you're just informed, when you have the actual information, being able to make educated decisions and all. It's great. As we're kind of wrapping up today, I'm curious, Tyler, is there anything else that maybe you haven't gotten a chance to share? Any advice or anything? We talk a lot about healthy churches. Anything that you'd like to share on the topic of that?
Man, what there's so much I could say, but a healthy church has leadership that's passionate about connecting with the people they serve in order to advance the gospel. So unfortunately, we've seen instances, we've had people hire us that just wanted to grow their church numerically, and that showed that their passion was misplaced. And so healthy churches are pursuing people for the sake of the gospel. But in order to do that, you need to know people in order to reach people. And so that's where that ideal audience comes in, and creating an environment, an ethos that really supports connecting with them in meaningful ways so that your vision can come to fruition.
No, that's so good. And I love the heart of it too. And it is going back to some simple principles, right? I mean, for every ministry leader, and we got into this because we love the Lord, and he's called us to love people, right? Being able to go out there and to share that gospel, and to put people, to put people first as we're out there doing that, and putting God first and sharing him with people is why we do what we do. What a good reminder today. Before we jump in, we love to do a final five. We got to do a kind of a speed round. We've got some fun questions that I want to ask you. But before we do that, I think something that would be helpful. One of the things that I think has been so great that ministry leaders can take from this. Remind us again, you touched on this before. What are those 5 things that are really simple that ministry leaders can use to identify their target audience?
Yeah, so this is a great place to start if you don't have the funds to invest in research or something like that. So the 5 P's of church target audience are people. So that's like your basic demographics, right? Age, kids, household makeup, place, your geography, where do they come from? Are new people coming from 15 minutes away, 15 miles away, 20, whatever that is? Their passions. What are they interested in? What's driving them? What do they like to do for fun?
Yes.
Pain points. What are they struggling with, right? What are they trying to overcome? And then the last one is pursuits. So they're aspirations. They're trying to get somewhere in life at the end of the day. They're not just trying to spin their wheels and work until they die. What is the thing that they're trying to chase, and how can the church potentially help support that?
I love that. Such great practical advice. Are you ready to jump into this final rapid fire round? All right, let's have some fun with this. Real quickly, what is one book on this subject that you would recommend to church leaders?
I think a great one, and this has probably been said on other podcasts, but Building a Story Brand. There's version 2.0 that's out now, but that's so central to, what do you do once you understand people? And putting it into a framework to help connect through communication. And so that would be my recommendation there.
It's a great one. I've read the first one, and I walk in the airport yesterday, and that 2.0 is first book I saw sitting on a stand. I was like, all right, I got to jump into this. I got to get the new version. Yeah. What is the last thing that you listen to on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you like?
So every Friday, a friend of mine, Josh Taylor, has a podcast called The Next Right Question. It's a 5-minute podcast, which is fantastic for me. I'm not a huge podcast person. 5 minutes is so digestible, and he keeps it simple, thought-provoking. And it really just focuses on, again, what's the next right question. So it really helps me kind of focus my days, my weeks, on what's the next thing I should be doing. What's the question I should be asking myself to move forward towards the goals that I have.
Awesome. I'll have to check that one out. 5 minutes. That's low commitment. I think I can go check
Right?
that out. What is your favorite piece of technology or software these days?
I mean, if anybody hasn't answered AI at this point, I feel like they're lying to you. I use Magi personally, but because it's so flexible and powerful.
Yes.
But when you're talking about audience research and being able to develop those personas and putting that information in to then output relevant stuff is that much easier. Man, it helps me write our emails so much faster because it sounds like me. It's got my input and teachings. Man,
incredible.
It's such a time saver when done right.
Great. And that's a great suggestion. Is there a quote or maybe some advice that has kind of stuck with you over the years?
So this one, there's a couple that come to mind, but I'm going to go with this one. And it's, so for those that are watching on YouTube, behind me is a smiley face picture, which seems super random. But I am originally from Massachusetts, Worcester, Massachusetts. And believe it or not, the smiley face had to be invented at one point. Created. And so Harvey Ball is the creator of the smiley face, and he's from Worcester, Massachusetts. He used to lease his office space from my grandfather. So I had spent time with him getting to know the creator of the smiley face. Backstory, it was like for a marketing campaign for life insurance. But on that smiley face, he wrote, "Smile, Tyler, it's a great life." And so that in and of itself, okay, sounds cool. It's smile, whatever. But the context here that makes it incredibly important is I have another piece of art from him that I don't have up behind me, but it's a sketch of his World War II foxhole on Christmas Day, where he handwrote on the back a story of using his buddy's helmet as a latrine because he was afraid of friendly fire and, all this stuff on Christmas Day. And so you have the creator of the smiley face having that juxtaposition of being at war and afraid for your life and fighting for our country. And it's like when he says it's a great life. Yeah, man, it's a great life. So it kind of just helps keep my perspective anchored.
Tyler, I love that answer. Incredible answer. And so cool to hear those stories. I've never heard those before. Wow, that's really something. As we close out, what is one thing that you'd like to communicate to our audience of church leaders today?
Yeah. Your context matters and your church is needed. I think, I mentioned that earlier, like there's so many churches that just feel discouraged and like they're not good enough. They can't keep up. They're not the big church. And data shows, I deal with it every day, that there are thousands and thousands of people in your community that need your church. And so to embrace that and to move forward with that encouragement, I think is really, whether you're big, small, young, old, you are needed and you are doing good things, and your community just needs you to get more clear in how you share, how you can help them.
What a word for today. Tyler, thank you so much for taking time to share with us today and for sharing your heart. I mean, I can just tell that you're really passionate about helping these ministries. And so thank you for all that you're doing. Where can people follow you? Where can they find out more about your services, and where can they keep up with you on social media or your website? Can you share that with us?
Yeah, sure. So you can follow me on social media. I'd love to connect. It's Tyler D. Harden on most social platforms. Or you can obviously head to firmfoundationsmarketing.com. You can book a discovery call there. We can talk more about how to find your target audience, your ideal audience for your church, and how that impacts everything you do. So would love to talk more. I love talking data in practical ways and helping church leaders take practical steps.
Incredible. Again, thank you so much for all of us today. And yeah, if that's something for everyone who's watching today, if that's something that you'd like to find out more about, definitely check that out. But for everyone who is tuned in today, thank you so much for joining us and for checking out this podcast. We are passionate about helping churches and equipping you to thrive and to become the healthiest version of your ministry. And so we love to help with that by sharing these podcasts, sharing these resources. And so if you can help us, the one thing that would be amazing is to just share this. Maybe you have a friend that's serving in ministry that would benefit from hearing this conversation, somebody on your team or maybe in another ministry that would benefit from it. But also, we've got an entire library of episodes that talk church leadership and talk different avenues, all different topics around just making your church healthy. And so definitely check those out. Share this with someone. If you're watching on YouTube, come on, hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way to help us to, you can see it will show up right at the top of your page whenever we release a new episode. And then also wherever you're listening to your podcast, leave a review there. It goes such a long way. And we just love hearing stories of how this podcast has made an impact and just encouraged you along the way in ministry. And so thank you for every single one of those steps that you do to help us get this in the ears of more church leaders. It really means the world to us. And so until next time, we will see you right back here on Church Leadership Lab.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.